Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're ending up chapter 12 of book 2, which wraps up book 2 um, 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 of the Politics, which dealt with, so far this was about the best regimes and regimes that have been held best. First, he dealt with, the theoretically best, that was, Plato's Republic, and then the laws, and then Aphelius Calderon's communism, and then Hippodamus, the city administrator. And then he dealt with actual regimes, the first Sparta, Crete, and then Carthage, right? And then, now he's dealing with, he's now, this, and by the, only, and by the way, I'm not found much scholarship on this. And the only person I remember ever talking about this chapter specifically in my memory was Mary Nichols in her first book, Socrates and Political Community. And the last chapter of the book deals with this. A book that's about Plato and the Republic now deals with only this chapter in book 2, and this chapter particularly was dealt in that book. And it was not even as done that well in her book on the commentary on the politics. So therefore, I just mentioned that is that thing. We'll look at this right here, chapter 12, the last. This is about the legislatures and things like this. This is about all the other regimes and about lawgivers out there. Notice that he didn't talk about Athens at all yet. Now, it'll be here he will mention Athens, and Solon and other things like this. So we're going to come here about this, right? It starts out, let's look at chapter 12. Of those who have put forward some views concerning the regime, some did not share in political actions of any sort, but led entirely private lives. Concerning them, if there is anything that merits attention, has been spoken of the most part, in the cases of all of them. In other words, if they're private persons like this, usually it's been addressed. But remember, Hippodamus is really the first one who's like that. Hippodamus, he talked about this in someone in private life, not political men. We've dealt with this already. So concerning them, if there's anything that merits attention, it has been spoken of for the most part. There's no other people, right? We're going to be now, but others became legislators. Some for their own city, others for foreigners, certain foreigners as well, and engaged in politics themselves. So therefore, right now, he's going to be talking about legislators, people who may have been citizens, may have been foreigners, who engaged in politics, making laws, giving them laws and giving them regimes, right? Uh, and that they engaged in politics themselves. And of these, some were craftsmen of laws only, but others of regimes as well. So there's two types of there's two types of this lawgiver: the lawgiver who only makes laws, specific laws, legislation, and then there's the legislature who crafts regimes. So there's twofold of these things, and these are the people who he goes the two classic ones, right? For example, Lycurgus and Solon, who established both laws and regimes. So the two examples, Lycurgus, which he deals with, remember, he gives us an account of Lycurgus, and this is about this forming of Sparta, and the argument is Lycurgus kind of chickens out. He doesn't give this. He doesn't really give, because the women didn't want to do what he did for the men, and therefore he just caved in and didn't do it. Solon, we have no account of Athens. We get no account of, we do get an account of Athens in his constitution of the Athenian regime, right? But that was discovered late. It's not included in the classic things of this. This is one of the constitutions. Question whether he wrote it or not. So now we know he wrote it. Uh, 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 Therefore, this is that we get no account of in the Aristotle. We only kind of Solon we get one now. We get kind of Solon talked about, and people talk about occasionally through examples later in the book, but now we get this kind of reference here. And then Lycurgus and Solon are an example of legislators who have both create laws but also create regimes. Now, the regime of the Spartans has been spoken of. As for Solon, there are some who suppose him to have been an excellent lawgiver. Now, again, 117. Solon was traditionally regarded as the founder of democracy, the democratic regime in Athens in 6th century. The identity of the proponents of this view ascribed described here are not certain. Aristotle himself, later in 311a, indicates approval of Solon legislation. So therefore, this is the democratic character of the Solon, a kind of democracy. Well, let's go here. Um, he is as an excellent, as reputed as an Aristotle will agree with this in book 3. For they say he dismantled an oligarchy that was too unmixed and put an end to slavery of the people and established a traditional democracy under which the regime was finely mixed. The council of the Areopagus being aristocratic, from being oligarchic, the oligarchic classes, the element of elective offices being aristocratic, that you elected them by the best people, and the court being popular, the courts by lottery, right? The assemblies and the things like that. It would seem, though, that Solon found these things existing previously, the consul and elections to offices, and did not dismantle them, but established rule by the people by making the courts open to all, lawsuits and law things. Thus, there are also some who blame him for dissolving the other elements of the existing regime by giving the authority to the court, which had been chosen from all by lot. In other words, the argument was before the older regime, it was by the king, the archon, who would rule, who would make the decision, or the Areopagus. The Areopagus was the central court. But now what happens here is that was oligarchic in the idea, and that by giving it to the people, he made it democratic, and it was chosen by lot, and giving the authority to the court, and also some of the office holders were given by lot. Offices were given by lot. For once this had become strong, they tried to gratify the people as if it were a tyrant, and altering the regime established the current democracy. The current democracy is that the people are now the tyrant. And in order to satisfy the people, in other words, once that the people had become so strong and through the courts, they had become a tyrant by controlling the courts, then by lawsuits, they became like a tyrant, and they appeased them and gave more power. And this has created the current democracy, he says. Now, Epicletus and Pericles cut back the council of the Areopagus. Pericles established pay for the courts. And in this manner, each of the popular leaders, the demagogues, each of the demagogues proceeded by increasing the power of the people, the people's power, in the direction of the current democracy, which is the rule. And he talks about that democracy is not one type of democracy. This is going to be addressed in book 4 of the Politics, so we're not going to get there right away. He goes 118. He goes, the reforms were effected around 460. Yet this appears to have happened coincidentally rather than accordance with the intentions of Solon. Now he's going to argue that the rise of these reforms occurred only after the defeat of the Persians and due to the naval victory, right? And that therefore this was not, and you say that right next. This is accident. This happened, not intent. Solon didn't intend these things to happen. It's not an intention of the regime. An accident happened. Now he says they're not with. They happened coincidentally by accident, rather than by accordance with the intention of the design of the regime. For because the people were the cause of Athens' naval superiority during the Persian wars, the rowers, they began to have high thoughts and to obtain mean persons as popular leaders when they were opposed politically by the respectable. The aristocratic party in Athens following the Persian War was held by Climon, Ecclestes, and Pericles, were the chief popular leaders or demagogues. That's why Socrates was. See, demagogue has gotten a negative meaning. Demagogue literally means popular leader in Greek, and the Lord will translate it not as demagogue, but as popular leader. It is with Plato and Aristotle a little bit that demagogue became negative. That Aristotle, Plato, and the ancient aristocrats hated the popular leaders. They thought they were not. They were problematic, and that the rise of democracy would lead to tyranny. Right. Some of the earlier democratic regimes created a tyranny, as the popular, the tyrants of Athens, right? Pistides and those families. Um, I said, in other words, the significance of the naval victory and the internal policy. See book five, book five, chapter four, about the regimes and what happened, the change of that. Now, Solon, at any rate, Solon seemed, at any rate, to have granted only the most necessary power to the people, that of electing to office and auditing. In other words, Solon was not a complete Democrat. He didn't go to the extreme. He was a reasonable Democrat. He gave to the people the power of electing electing to office and auditing. For the for if the people did not even have authority over this, they would be enslaved and an enemy to the regime. So he didn't want the people, the many, to be an enemy of the regime. So he had to give them some role in the regime, and that would they can audit and they can elect, they can choose, right? They weren't supposed to be picked for offices, okay? Uh, but but all the offices established by him were to be chosen from among the notables and the well-off people that are not the poor, the well-off, not the rich, the well-off. This is, I think we have to be careful here. What is well-off? Is not well-off means in one sense this have enough means, not wealthy. The wealthy has excessive means. The notables are those who have good birth and good establishment. Notables, those who have some note, some merit, and the well-off. From the 500 bushel men, the team men, and the third ratings of the so-called cavalry. But the fourth, the laborers, the vulgar, the laborers. So therefore, the 500 bushel men, and teams men, and the third ratings, and the so-called cavalry men. These are the better ones. But the fourth element, the laborers, the physical laborers, the ones who had only their bodies, these laborers, the ones who had their bodies only to sell, and maybe the craftsmen too, but that's not even. The laborers had no part of any offices, of any office. The key assessment of the Solonian forms the establishment of the four systems, the four assessments of classes, based on landed wealth as distinct from birth. So, in other words, you had to have some means, you had to have resources. Solon understood the necessity between having means, and with the people without means are going to be more problematic than those with some mean, but not having too much. Okay, that's Aristotle will talk about this in book four about the necessity of the mesos, the mean, between excessive wealth and excessive poverty. That this is a middle sort, an average, and this is whereas virtue is an extreme. The mean here, and the mean, virtue is a mean. Well, virtue is not an average. Virtue is a extreme of a mean means the hitting the right thing in the virtue and the ethics. But the mean in the politics is a moderate position. It is between an excess and a defect, like that. Uh, it is like that, but it is an averaging here, for unlike in the ethics. In other words, uh, and he continues here that therefore this is the criteria. Now let's go to the next line. So therefore, the fourth element, the fourth class, not the laborers, the other legislators, and so therefore that's Solon. He talked about Solon. The other legislators were Zalcois for the Zephyrians, Zephyrian locations. So locations. This group of locations was this guy Zephyrinus, and Calderon of Cantana for both his own cities and that other Chaldalic city in Italy and in Sicily. So this guy Caldonas of Cantia. So not only for Cantia, but also the other these Chaldidic cities in Italy and Sicily. So therefore, he mentioned these. The other legislators will note. Some persons attempted to connect them. Their view being that homocratis, a location, this that their view that this Omonocritus, a locration, right, was the first to become skilled at legislation. So this guy here is this, having been trained in Crete. In other words, this Lucretian was trained in Crete, where he visited there in connection with his practice of the divining art. In other words, the divining, that Thales became a companion of his, and that Lycurgus and Zacchaeus became the students of Thales, and the Calderonus of Zacchaeus. So therefore, Thales was the student of of this guy Omocrates, who went to Crete to learn from Minos, maybe, because this is the first lawgiver, the ancient lawgiver. They learned from the Crete, Lucretian, who went there, visited there in connection with his practice of divining arts. In other words, yeah, in other words, he was a diviner. He was the divining art, talking about the gods. So therefore, Minos is a god, right? So he went there to maybe the lawgivers, and therefore learned about legislation through this connection with Minos, to the god there, right? So therefore, this guy is this. Therefore, the critics who then taught who that Thales became a companion of his. So Thales, the scientist that we talked about, the Milesian example, the wise man, became a Thales. Is this Thales? And that Thales and this Calidonus of Zacchus became, in other words, that must have, this Calidon of Zacchus and Thales must have been connected with here, with Omocratus, right? And that therefore, Lycurgus and Zacchaeus, this guy, became with Lycurgus became students of Thales and Calidonus of Zalcris. Calidonus of Zalcris is again this other person who's there again. So therefore, it doesn't say who he was a thing of tied there, right? But they say these things without much of an investigation of the chronology, right? And here, 121, Calderon and Zacchaeus, 7th century BC, were sometimes connected with the circle of Pythagoras, Pythagoreans, right? Omocrates is probably the Orphic soothsayer who was influential in Athens at the time of the Pistid tyranny. The Thales in question is the poet, not the philosopher, sorry. This is the poet, or Theletius of Gortian in Crete. He's a Cretan, another Cretan. Okay, again a Cretan. This is a different. I'm sorry. I thought he was the philosopher of Metellina. This is not that Thales. This is the Thales of Guron, or the different names. But okay, that's why the Thales here is differently Tateles, of Goron and Crete. It's a different Thales, not the Thales that we talked about earlier in book one of the philosopher, the one who gets the olive presses, but a different. That's again, that's a little trick. I thought it was the same Thales, but again, this is the part of the text that I'm not the strongest, and I spend more time book 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I spend 1, 2. I always skip 2 because 2 is always like. So this has been fun for me doing, because I've been relearning from reading this, discovering things here. So therefore, the Thales here is a different Thales, right? So therefore, we get the chronology, and these things are just stated, but no real explanation. But Philodonos of Corinth was the legislature for the Thebans, so a different guy, Philus. So therefore, we got another ones. We have this guy, Zaracletus for the Ephorians, Loquacians, and Calidonus of this, both for the Chaldean city, for his own citizens at Cadina, and that of the Chaldidic cities in Italy and there, for cities he created. Then it gives the origins of the history of here, and ties them to Thales, a different poet, which you don't get, and again, Lycurgus and this guy, Zalcatus, are connected as studying with Thales. Thales was tied to him, and then Chaldeanus and Thales were students of became students, and these guys became students of these two guys. So therefore, this guy is how this guy's connected. This guy is not. He doesn't say how this guy connects to this guy. So must have been, and I think yeah, maybe that's the thing. That's the connection. Now we get, and that's the one is the soothsayer. This guy's the soothsayer, and then we say this is probably connected to he was there there. And what is the let's go look at the 2021. These two guys, what there was sometimes that the circles of Pythagoras, Pythagoreans. This guy's circumstance, and therefore, so therefore, that's why the poet is the not poet. The poet Thales is mentioned as a connection to Omocratus, right? So therefore, that's the. But now we're going to the next one. Someone else. Pylaidonis of Corinth was legislature based on the Thebans. So the Thebans have this legislative. Philolausus. Philolausus was of the Bacchid family. He became a lover of Diocles, the Olympic victor. And when the latter left the city in disgust at his mother's Anulus loves of himself, of him. In other words, he didn't want to. This is again the mother's love of the brother, this Oedipus thing. So he fled. The mother loved him too much, and he fled his mother's love. His the mother disgust at his mother's love, his mother's and a love of himself. He went to Thebes. Remember Thebes? The Oedipus, right? This is kind of kind of something opposite the Oedipus, right? And there both of them ended their lives. So therefore, the two lovers, this guy, Philobades, was the lover of Diocles, and Diocles fled from his own city of because of his mother's love and went to Thebes, and both of them went to Thebes. This guy, because he went to Thebes, this guy followed him to Thebes, and this guy becomes the legislature of the Thebans, the lover, the homosexual lover of him, becomes the Theban things. So therefore, that's the second one. The homosexual lover becomes the lawgiver of the Thebans. And the Thebans will be the big military. They are the northern Greek cities that's democratic, but it was a kingship that became democratic. This is where Thebes is where Oedipus is from, the Oedipus story. Okay, and then the fall of Oedipus and his sons and the rise of the Thebans. Yeah, Thebes. And then what happens is Thebes is a democracy that becomes an enemy of Athens, right? Or joins with the Spartans against Athens. Okay, and this is what's kind of undoes Athens a little bit. Um, um, that's the Thebans, right? And now he says, and even now they show their tombs, which are in few view of one another. The two lovers of the kingdom that they abide together, but one has a view towards Corinthian territory. This came from Corinth, right? The Corinthian territory, and the other does not. The tale being told that they arranged the burial this way. Diocletian, out of hatred for the passions of his mother, so that the territory of Corinth would not be visible from his mound. Peleus, so that it would be from his. So therefore, he wanted to look at Beckett. See, Diocletian wanted to hide from his mother, so he doesn't see Corinth. Whereas Philolaus does see Corinth. They came originally from Corinth. He's of Corinth, right? He's of Corinth. Both of them came from Corinth. They fled from Corinth. Corinth is that it's a Corinth. Corinth is that it's a Peloponnesian oligarchy that is about wealthy commercial people. It's an enemy of Athens. It's an oligarchy. It's an oligarchy, but it's a commercial oligarchy. It shares, but it's commercial rather than martial like Sparta. So the Corinthians are, and that there was the out of the unloved natural love of the mother, he flees there, the Olympic victor, right? So they settled among the Thebans for this reason, and Phyleus became a legislature for them concerning childbearing, among other matters. which they call the adoptive laws. This is something particular to his legislation. It, it proposes being that the number of allotments should be preserved. Now, this is interesting. 22, that nothing is known of failures, and that's what the Lord says. There's not much. It's the only thing we were told by Aristotle. Nothing is particular to Cardonius except trials in the case of perjury, where he was the first to introduce denunciation for this. But in the precision of his law, he is even more polished even than current legislators. In other words, his understanding of perjury and how it's handled, he was the first to denounce it, but his understanding is even more polished than the contemporary views of this legislation. So he's a very nice. He's a very. In other words, he's saying his laws, even though he's earlier, he's one of the first person who does it, but his laws polished and even more contemporary. So Callias is mostly known for his law in a specific legislation. Regarding Peleus, is the leveling of property. In other words, this Peleus of Calderon. He repeats it now. He's repeating some of the other people. Peleus of Calderon, of leveling property. So going back, he's repeating the other accounts, right? To Plato, having a common women and children as well as property. And further, the law concerning drinking. Remember, this is about the laws, right? The law drinking, suppose here. That the sober must act as rulers of drinking parties. and that aspect of military training which has them develop a dexterity. Again, this is the laws, and the assumption that they should not have one useful and one useless hand. Again, 123. This is from the laws. All those things he mentions there are from the laws, right? So therefore, the first thing, the communism of women, that's played. The communism of women and children is that like this, and the of women and children and property. This is the republic, and further that of drinking, and that the sober should rule the drinking parties, and that the military they should be ambidextrous, right? That they should. This is the laws. There are laws of Draco. So therefore, we have. Now, it is interesting. He lists Plato as a legislator. Well, we have to remember Plato does go to advise the Dionysius, the tyrant of Sicily, the tyrant Dionysius. He goes to a tyrant, and isn't that kind of engaging in politics? To what degree is Plato merely only a theoretical person? Because everyone else, he doesn't. Now he mentions Peleus. He doesn't mention Hippodamus now. He mentions he repeats Peleus of Calderon, that of leveling property, right? But he mentions Plato. The question is Peleus and this, but not Hippodamus. He quite about Hippodamus, but Hippodamus is the first person who's not a lawgiver. So everyone else these people are actual politicians, people who engaged in politics. Hippodamus wasn't engaging in politics, he says. So now we end with this suggestion that Plato was a legislator. That's interesting. Now, but he says now there are the laws of Draco, but he laid them down. For an existing regime. There is nothing particular to these laws that are worth recalling, except the harshness deriving from the size of the penalty, draconian. Right, as we get the word draconian. Dracos was the first. Let's say the author of the first legal code of the Athenians in the 7th century. So Draco is not. So there's two Athenian accounters. There's Solon, who gives the democratic regime, but Draco, the law, and the draconian, the excessive penalties, right? The size of the penalties. Now he goes. Picatus too was a craftsman of the laws and not the regime. So Picatus is mentioned. Particular to him is the law that those who are drunk should pay a greater penalty than the sober if they commit an offense. Now it goes for on account of the fact that the more persons commit outrages when drunk than in sober. He did not have regard for an indulgence that should have been shown towards those who are drunk than rather than to what is advantageous. In other words, now 125 here is Petitus was the elected dictator of Mytilene. He was a dictator, he was elected officer during the period of civil strife there, right? In the 6th century. He was later enrolled together with Solon among the 7 wise men of Greece. So he's one of the 7 wise men of Greece. Picatus is the dictator of the elected dictator at Mytilene, and he's there to solve the fratricide, and he punishes drunken people more, as for on account of the fact that more persons commit outrages when drunk than sober. Right? He did not have regard for an indulgence that should be drawn towards those who are drunk, rather than what is advantageous. In other words, he thought that it wasn't intentional, it wasn't intended. He didn't really care for the question of intentionality. He said the question is what is advantageous for the city. Okay, that we need to punish the drunk more than we publish the greater penalty when they're drunk than the sober, because more people engage in drunk. Therefore, we have to make the cost of being drunk because they're going to more likely commit these people who don't intend crimes will commit more crimes. I want to reduce the number of crimes or problems, so I need to scare the shit out of everyone. In that sense, right? This is that aspect of that. And now he goes. So that's the law, and this is Pittacus. So if there was Draco is the first of lawmakers, people who only deal with laws. Draco, an Athenian, Picatus, from again, this is Metlina, right, an elected official, and Drachmas of Regillum was also a legislature for the Cilicians of Thracian, right, of Regillum, in matters concerning homicides and heiresses. But there is nothing in particular to him that worth mentioning, right? This is 126. Nothing known as Dominus. But he does 2 things: heiresses and of that, and what concerning regimes, both those that have had authority, in other words, and what concerns regimes, both those that have authority and those spoken of about by certain persons, in other words, may be considered to have been studied then in this manner, right? So most of all, this chapter is regarded by some scholars as a doubt for authenticity. And most of this chapter is they think, oh, this is Socrates. And Schrumpf always a discussion of this is done by Schrumpf, the German scholar. Oh, this is not really Aristotle. I think it is. I think he ends up with statesmen. This is the discussion of the lawgivers and the statesmen. The lawgivers who are particularly tied with statesmen. And he suggests that that Plato's a traditional politician that is a founder of not only of laws but also regimes. Now, the discussions of lawgivers who just only give laws, he gives here. And then what's interesting is this last one. This one he just deals with something that he doesn't even mention it worthwhile. It's homicides, something about homicides and heiresses, that these were good, but we're not going to mention. There is nothing particular to him that is worth mentioning. And then therefore he ends this with this idea that everything we talked about during regimes that are actual, in other words, those who have authority, but in other words, concerning regimes, both of those that have authority and those who have been spoken of by certain peoples, those regimes, those actual regimes. And remember, they reverse this, right? Instead of talking about the actual regimes, he talks after his account of those talked about it, right? So he here says those who have authority, those regimes that we think that really are ruling ones. I think authority means kairos, ruling, and those spoken of by certain persons. Those are Plato, right? May have been considered to have been studied, then in this manner, this way, and this is how he ends this chapter. Well, this is going to end here. We end book 2. Next time we meet, we'll start book 3. I think, book 3, chapter 1. That's it. well, have a good day. First of all, please put your comments below. Say what you, and I'll respond to them. If you have any questions or inquiries, I will respond to them when I see them. If you like what you see, like it. If you didn't like it, like I say, some criticism, please. Um, you can share this with a friend. If you have not subscribed already, subscribe. Share with a friend. Get others to subscribe. You can follow me in social media. The information is below. You can, if you want to help this me and my channel grow a little bit and do things and help me buy some more books. You feel, "Look, you have too many books already." No, I always need to learn more. There's always new books coming out on Aristotle and scholarship all the time. So it's very expensive, and that's to keep up. And libraries, I live in Poland. Libraries crap. Libraries are crap for the most part. You can't go to the libraries. And the library tries to be good, but it's still millions of years behind what common practice in the United States. The average library here is in English language. There's almost nothing, and actually the scholarship in Polish is mediocre. So that's why it's some help if you want to. And I don't, because I'm the foreigner here, I don't get. They always think, you get American money. Well, American money. Hate to say it, I can't get American money. I work for a Polish institution, so American foundations cannot give me money here because my school is not a U.S. tax entity. So therefore, the charitable money or school research money goes to the institution, not to the person. And that since the institution doesn't have a tax, I can't even get them to do a stupid U.S. tax ID number, which they must have. They won't give it out. So I can't even apply for grants. That sucks. And the Polish grants I could probably get, they say, but I'm not going to get it. I'm a foreigner, okay? So therefore, that's the only way I live off my salary and any money I make for my salaries. That's how I get to buy books and things like that. So, but if you want to help me, you want to do subscribe to our Patreon, you can buy my Lulu book. If you buy it by Lulu directly, I make more money. But you can get it at Amazon. Amazon will give me. You buy it by Amazon, it's cheaper. I know you get free shipping, but you get paid. Lulu makes you pay shipping, so you don't want to pay it that. But if you buy it from Amazon, Amazon makes a profit from it, and I get less of my profit from it. But if you buy it from Lulu, I get what Amazon gets. Will get. So, but again, I understand why you do that. This is basically Cliff's notes, my notes on Aristotle's politics. It gives charts. It's a reading guide. It's not an interpretation. It's not a commentary per se. It is a study guide. It goes through and gives outline structures of the chapters. You can take notes and things on it. I have after every book, I have a place, a page that you can actually take some notes on it. It's basically a guide to help you go. It's a workbook. That's why I call it a workbook in that sense. To go through and reading it as a guide as you go through the politics. That's it. Okay, that's it today. I will see you guys next time we meet when we look at book 3.